Thanks everyone for coming. I hope you're having a great experience here at Inbound. Very briefly, a quick introduction to myself. Nataly Kelly, I'm Vice President of Marketing Localization here at HubSpot, which basically means I think about global stuff all day long. So that's actually the topic, and I'm glad that so many of you are here today to hear about lessons that we can learn from mistakes that have been made by companies all around the world. Just a quick check, everybody in the back can hear me okay? Okay, great. So really quickly, I know all of you are marketing and social media experts. Just wanted to shout out that we have the hashtag Inbound15. If you're live tweeting, people around the world right now are joining in and listening to the conversation, hoping to learn from some of these sessions. So any of you who are doing that, please feel free to share that on social media. So enough about me. I have 5 questions for all of you. So first question is, how many of you have customers outside of your home country? Almost everyone. That's really impressive. And how many of you are from the US, headquartered here? And how many of you are from other countries? Awesome. So we have a lot of good international experience right here in the room. Second question for you. How many of you have more than 25% of your customers outside your home country? Good number. I'd say about maybe a quarter of the room. And how many of you are actively marketing outside of your home country today? So a good number as well. And how many of you are marketing in other languages? Okay, good number too. And I'd love to hear some quick shout outs of what are some of the challenges that you face with global marketing. Just shout them out. What's that? Culture, big one. Translation. Finding good marketing staff for all your international locations. If anyone wants a job, we have an offer right here. Someone's hiring. What other challenges? Quality control, huge one, especially linked to translation, right? Any other big ones? I got a jumble there, sorry. Again? Data, getting good data from all the different international locations. It's a really good one too. Yeah?
Really, for me, the problem would be the demand gen program, so knowing what avenues to actually run.
Yes, using the right programs for the right markets, that's incredibly important too. Any other big ones? I'll try to make sure I hit on some of these throughout the presentation. Any other big ones that are burning issues for you guys? Yes, holidays, purchasing trends, all of these things are really important to consider when you're dealing with global markets. Great, so I've got a lot of challenges. Oh, there's one more. Legislation, huge, huge, especially when we're talking about digital marketing, all the different laws that we have to think about. So these are all good. I can't promise I will go into detail on every single one of your challenges, but I will try to hit on them a little bit as I cover some of these marketing blunders. So the good news is that a lot of companies have challenges. We're getting a sense of that here from in the room, but it isn't just all of us here in the room. Even the biggest companies in the world who have a lot of experience with international marketing make big mistakes. So that tells us that this is not easy. It's really hard stuff. So I'm going to give you guys some proof. And before I do, I just wanted to say that the reason that I focused on blunders is not only because everybody likes to hear mistakes and how people do things wrong, but it's because we want to learn from that. So a lot of these brands that I'm going to cover, it's not to poke fun at them, and I would ask any of you who are sharing things on social media, let's be kind in how we treat these brands, because they're actually, kudos to them that they're even thinking about marketing internationally to begin with, and everybody makes mistakes sometimes. So we will probably have a good laugh at some of these, but we also want to be kind and recognize that they're brands that are, marketers just like us trying to, do a good job and sometimes learning the hard way. So the first one I wanted to share, is anyone familiar with this example before I go into detail? No one? Oh, good, I picked a good one. Is there anyone here from Ireland by any chance? Where? Oh, yay. Okay, we have some Irish friends in the back. Okay, so you guys don't answer this question. Who knows who the black and tans are? Any British in the audience? Okay, most Americans don't know this. Americans, what do you think of when you hear black and tan? Beer. It's a drink, right? So that's probably what Ben & Jerry's were thinking when they said black and tan. But for my Irish friends, can you give a quick description of what the black and tans, who the black and tans are or were?
They were soldiers who were during the war, to enforce laws.
Yes, so basically hired mercenaries who killed people or were alleged to have killed people. So this product was released around St. Patrick's Day. Not exactly a good message to send. And this is our beloved Ben & Jerry's, come on, we love you guys, but this was not your best moment. So they did have to pull this product from the shelves. Interestingly, the community in Ireland actually didn't get too outraged by this. It was mostly Irish Americans who were really angry and got outraged, and they had to pull the product from the shelves. So this is an example of a company that didn't even have to cross a language barrier and didn't even have to cross a huge cultural barrier. We're not talking US to China. We're talking US to Ireland, US to Irish Americans, and they made that big mistake. So I think this is a good example. But you would think, so this happened a few years ago, you would think that no other company would ever make this mistake again. I mean, it was in the news, a lot of people reported on it, like nobody would ever use this black and tan example to launch a product for St. Patrick's Day, right? At least no major brand would do that. Uh-oh. Nike did it too. So Nike launched a black and tan sneaker a couple years later. And a couple years go on, and digital media is more of a thing, and people are more interconnected, and the world is a more interconnected place. And then it starts to really hit the brand in a way that hurts, and you start to see it reported in the news. So you can see Nike actually had to make an apology for their black and tan sneaker. As you can see here, it's like calling a shoe the Al-Qaeda. That might be a little bit extreme, but there's actually a quote here from someone from the US Lobby for Immigration Reform, or US-based Irish Lobby for Immigration Reform, saying, "Is there no one at Nike who can Google black and tan?" And you have to ask yourself that question, what are brands thinking sometimes when they launch a product like this without considering all the impact that it might have in another culture? Well, usually it's because we're operating from a place of false knowledge. We think that we know the market better than we do. So that's an important consideration. So I guess the big lesson to be learned here is the very first thing that was raised when I asked what the challenges were: culture. Culture matters a lot. A lot of people think that the challenges that they'll face with global marketing are really just about language, but language is kind of more of a symptom of some of these problems. It's really culture that is the biggest issue. So that's the first lesson to be learned from some of our global marketing blunders. For our next example, let's travel with another brand around the world. I won't say this is my favorite place to eat, but I had to pick some ice cream beyond Ben & Jerry's to show you. So does anyone know where these are from, where you can get these McFlurries and ice cream products? Which countries? Any guesses? I heard Australia, I heard... Yeah, well, there's a Turkish one. Yeah, there's a Turkish one with apricots on the right side on the bottom. There is, on the right side on the top, there's actually a McFlurry that has Oreos and pineapple. I apologize for those of you who didn't get a chance to eat lunch. Maybe these were not the best images to select, in case you're hungry. And the one on the left is actually sold in Denmark, or was sold in Denmark, with Toblerone. That one I kind of wish they had here. But these are some good examples, right? These are examples of a company adapting their product to fit local market needs and local market tastes. And McDonald's has also traditionally done a pretty good job of this, even with beverages. For example, you can get wine with your McDonald's meal in Argentina. You can get beer with your McDonald's meal in Germany, in some locations in Germany. And even the sizes. And for those of you who've ever thought American sizes are really big, yes, they are, and here's the proof. The sizes are actually completely different from one market to the next. So McDonald's usually does a good job with adapting their products and marketing in other languages and marketing to other cultures. But what do you think about this? So first of all, who can identify this language? Does anyone know what language this might be? What's that? Polish was a guess. Icelandic is another guess. I'll give you a clue. It's more toward Asia. I know, it's a hard one to identify, especially because there are some problems with the translation, so it makes it even harder. Let me give you a clue. So what country do you think this advertising was for? You have a currency up there giving you a clue. It's in US dollars. And then we've got the I'm loving it tagline in English for the US audience. So where could this possibly be for? Somebody said US? It's for the US market. What population? Sorry? I couldn't hear that. Hawaii. Oh, interesting. Yeah, not a lot of companies are advertising in Hawaiian, but it could have been. So this is, to give you a better clue, maybe someone will guess this. It's in Minnesota. There's a very large population. I think I heard somebody say. Hmong, yes, it's the Hmong language, and it's the Hmong population from Southeast Asia. There's a very large community of Hmong speakers in Minnesota. So this was actually a giant billboard that was erected along a highway in Minnesota. And there was actually two problems with this advertising. One of the big problems was the Hmong don't drink coffee. They drink tea. The advertising actually says coffee gets you up, breakfast gets you going. But the other big problem with this campaign was that the Hmong language doesn't normally look like that. So for those of you who are guessing languages that tend to have really long nouns or really long words, Hmong isn't like that. It's just that they happen to apparently copy and paste out of some program and copy it into their InDesign or whatever they were using, and all the spaces got deleted, except for one before moose. So not only is this a strange thing for somebody driving along who doesn't really drink coffee in the morning to see, but it's their language, but it's sort of their language. It's like a bunch of words stuck together. So major, major fail from a brand that was trying to market within their own country, but to a domestic multicultural audience. And they normally do such a good job with most of their campaigns. They've won awards for a lot of their campaigns, both domestic, multicultural, and global campaigns. So what do you think the main lesson is to be learned from this particular example? Know your audience. Yes, know your audience. And there were obviously some translation problems here too, with the language itself. And I think the other example is every market matters. You know, if you're going to go to the trouble of putting a billboard up, why not make sure that you devote the same time and care that you would for any other population? You know, it's treating them differently than you would treat a campaign that's designated for an English-speaking audience. So that's another important lesson to be learned. Now, do we have any French speakers in here? I see a French speaker. Would you mind saying MR2 in French? Yes. And so someone said, if you say that really fast, what does it sound like? Merde. Yeah. So, which for those of you who don't know, if you pronounce this merde, it basically sounds kind of crappy. So that is an example of an actual car, a model that was launched. And these are, not a cheap little coffee. This is an expensive product that a lot of marketing money went behind. And it was named, unfortunately. So what do you think they did when they launched it in France? Well, nobody wants to be made fun of for driving a crappy car, So they actually had to remove the 2. So they took the number 2 out of the situation. So this is another example. So what do you think went wrong here? What could they have done differently to prevent this from happening? Yeah.
Have a local advisor
Excellent. Have a local advisor. Talk to the local market. You know, there's something called a global brand name search that a lot of companies do as well. And sometimes they're just looking from a trademark perspective, but often you can engage local companies to help you with this, and they'll actually tell you, are there any negative connotations? Connotations with competitors, connotations with other brands. Are those brands viewed positively or negatively? Is it a high-end brand? Is it a low-end brand? All of those different things. Now, related to this, this is not an example of a blunder, but just quickly to point out, does anyone know what is missing from this particular? Yes, it's a Chinese building. So we're missing a few numbers here. We're missing 13, missing number 14, and missing number 4. Does anyone know why 4 and 14 are not there? Yes, they're unlucky. And do you know why? Yes, the word for 4 sounds like death in Chinese. So in most campaigns that marketers are planning to run globally, or even product names, they will usually avoid the number 4. So Canon, for example, doesn't use the number 4 in any of its camera series. You'll see that they skip from 3 to 5. And I only share that here because I once shared this at a presentation, and a major kitchen appliance manufacturer was in the audience, and she said, "You saved us from launching the series 4444 internationally." So I always try to sneak that in from now on, because you never know what people are going to name their product. But that's definitely something to take into consideration. There are a ton of numbers like this around the world that have different connotations, but those are the big ones to be aware of. So we have to mind our numbers, not just the numbers that we choose, which might have connotations, but also how they're pronounced, like in that example that we showed with the automobile. So who knows why Bing is not that popular in China? I know some of my friends in the front row know this. There are competitor search engines. That's one reason. Any other reason that you guys know about? So this is another unfortunately named product. The word Bing actually sounds like disease in Chinese. So there are a lot of examples like this of companies that pick names without thinking about the global consequences. And usually before they think about going global, they're just thinking, oh, let's launch it locally, let's beta test it here. And they come up with a name, and then they try to extend that globally. Doing a global name search, engaging local companies to at least check linguistically on the connotations is a really good practice. A lot of companies skip that step. On the other hand, I do have to say that Microsoft does an amazing job with localization for a lot of their other products. They actually support a huge variety of locales, and they even have a program for endangered languages. So they're even localizing into Navajo and other languages of Native Americans. So they actually do some really good localization work too, not to pick on Bing too much. So I think we've heard this a few times. Get input from the local market before you launch. Get input even when you're just at the early planning stages, because you never really know how a product might take off overseas. Now, this is a lesson, I think, for all of us who are interested in inbound marketing, that the customer is more in control than ever. And we also have less control over the geography of the customer and where they might come from. If we're using digital practices, they can pretty much find us from anywhere, because once you have a website, you're global. Anybody can find you. So that's an important mindset shift that hasn't happened yet at a lot of companies. So I mentioned some friends from Sweden in the audience here. This is an example of a Swedish company that I think all of us know. Some of us might even have this chair. IKEA. So IKEA actually does a really good job with a lot of their documentation. They make it very, very easy to localize, because a lot of it is visual and picture-based communication. And some people ask me, is that something I should do? Should I use picture-based communication? Well, definitely not. It doesn't apply to every type of product and every type of company, but for assembling furniture, it definitely works well. So they do a pretty good job, but I wanted to share one example with you where they didn't do such a great job. So they have a catalog that's actually localized into lots of different languages and is distributed in many, many different countries, and the content is sometimes adapted. Most of it stays the same because it's usually just images of products. But they were in the news a couple of years ago for a mistake that they made. And I'll show you the example. So on the left, you see the Swedish catalog, an image from the Swedish catalog. And on the right, you see an image from the Saudi catalog. And you notice something's missing? Yeah, somehow the woman got erased. So I think, looking at this, whoever was in charge of this decision-making process was probably thinking, oh, we'll adapt it because we know that that might be offensive. But it was really a narrow view of what is offensive because a lot of people don't understand this properly. Even having any images of any people would be inappropriate for the Saudi market. So even having the child and the adult male there is not appropriate. It's kind of like in a lot of very conservative religions, like the Amish in the United States, it's not appropriate to make images of humans because it's seen as maybe worshiping a god or doing something that's, putting that image above another. So that's why this is a total fail, very misappropriate, and I would even say a stereotyping of the target market. What also is unfortunate about this particular example is that it did infuriate a lot of people who were loyal fans of the product and of the brand in their home market. So a lot of Swedish women did get very upset by this, and a lot of Swedish men as well, and a lot of people in other countries too. So, that's something important to think about that maybe we didn't have to think about as much 10 years ago as we really do today, that the world is very interconnected. So even if you're planning to launch something in just one market, you have to remember that a lot of people can find your content from anywhere. And so they may feel left out, or they may feel like, well, that's inappropriate, that's not, that's off-brand. They might actually have a reaction to that content as well. So as marketers, it's important for us to start thinking both about our global audience as well as about our local audience. So I think the biggest lesson from this is not to stereotype and to really get that local input whenever possible. And like I said, IKEA is an amazing company. They've done amazing things around the world, really great campaigns, award-winning as well, but they also had a major translation fail or a major marketing fail. And don't enrage your home market. Don't enrage your home market. Engage your home market. Enrage, not engage. Applies to local markets too. So now I'd like to share an example. This is from social media and video. A lot of you might be thinking about, how do I market online? What about social media? And what about video? What about YouTube channels, for example? So this is actually an example from Salesforce. And I don't know how clearly you guys can see. Maybe some of you in the front can help me answer this. Who do you think the target market is for this particular YouTube channel? So somebody over here said Latin America. It says SFDC Latin America, so that's the name of the channel for sure. And then there's English on the top. There's Portuguese on the description of this first video we see. Then there are 2 sections with Portuguese content. Then there's a section with Spanish content. So who is the target for this particular channel? What's that? Well, Brazilians. I mean, it looks like they have, you can see very small print here, but it says salesforce.com/BR. So it looks like they're trying to target Brazil, but they've got English, they've got Spanish, they've got Portuguese. What are they doing? So anybody have an idea as to how this might have happened? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Portuguese is a language that's spoken within Latin America. But it would almost be like saying SFDC Europe and having French, Swedish, Portuguese, Spanish, a mishmash of languages. Usually people want to consume content in their primary language. And there are occasions when they flip back and forth between languages in some bilingual or multilingual markets. But for the most part, most people will prefer Spanish or Portuguese. Definitely not English for Latin America. So what often happens, and what probably happened here, is that they thought, oh, we need to have a YouTube channel for Latin America. So they probably created that. And they probably started to see more traffic and more interest from Brazil. And so they started to promote more of their Brazil-focused content and their Portuguese-focused content. But they also had a good percentage coming from Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America too. So they put some Spanish-speaking content, or some content there for Spanish speakers. So, this is not the best user experience when you have a mishmash and it's not even clear who it's for. And that's happening a lot lately with social media channels and with American companies that are trying to create a presence for a huge region. Because a lot of American companies tend to think about the rest of the world as a region. Like, we're moving into APAC, we're moving into EMEA, we're moving into LATAM. Well, what does that really mean? Most of the customers in those locations don't think, I'm part of EMEA. They think, I'm French, or I'm Finnish, or in Latin America, I'm Brazilian, or I'm Chilean. So it's really important to remember how the customer thinks about themselves and not try to mishmash all of these together. So a much better approach would be to have country-specific channels. In fact, that's what I often advise for companies that have questions about this, to think at the country level. That's how most people identify with national identity versus with a pan-national or a regional identity. So the big lesson here is lead with country whenever possible, not with region. That's really important. So now I'm going to share 5 tips with you that I think are some tips that will help you with regard to some of the issues that were raised at the beginning. And then I'm going to leave it for questions. So hopefully some of you guys have some questions that I can answer for you. So the first tip that seems to help so many people who are dealing with global marketing is to select your translation vendors extremely carefully. So what do I mean by that? A lot of people ask me, how can I find the best translation vendor? And can you give me names of agencies? Well, the truth is that the best translation agency for you is going to be one that has experience in your type of content, has a project manager in your time zone who you can deal with very quickly and effectively, and who has taken content similar to yours into other languages in the past. So those are the 3 most important areas of expertise and things that you need to look for in translation vendors. I can give you a lot more information on that for anyone who has questions or interest. You also really need to spend a lot of time onboarding your translation partners, and by that I mean invest time in the relationship. Talk to them on the phone. If you can, talk to the translators themselves. Educate them on your brand. Give them as much information as you can about the company and about the products and about the content that they'll be working with. Another big one that a lot of companies ask me about is bilingual employees. Can I have my bilingual employees translate? No, please don't do that. You can, but they're not translators. So chances are they're going to make mistakes and they're going to hate their job if you ask them to translate. I once did a study for a very large cruise line, and they were having their salespeople translate content for them because they tended to hire salespeople who spoke the language, and then the marketing team wanted to localize that content. And what we found was that instead of selling, the salespeople were translating, and so they were missing out. We did the opportunity cost, millions of dollars that they could have been onboarding in new sales, but they were instead having their salespeople translate. So try not to use your bilingual employees to translate. You can always have them review, have them give feedback, but don't use them as your primary translators. Also, another question I often get asked is, can I use machine translation, like Google Translate? You can. It's very high risk. I would advise you not to, especially if it's marketing content. In fact, a lot of people don't realize that if you use Google Translate on web content, Google will actually track that as low-quality content, and it can hurt your search rankings. So try not to use Google Translate if it's content that you want to rank, and if it's content that's going to be customer-facing in general, because that is definitely not going to yield a high-quality translation. And I'll give you a few more quick tips. One, make sure that you give your local resources a reason to help you. So a lot of times, marketers will depend on their network of partners or their network of in-country employees, or even sometimes customer focus groups. Make sure that you don't just ask for their help without giving something in return. So create a benefit for them, or create a reason to engage them, and give them a reason to help you make sure that the quality is high quality. That's another one. Another quick tip for anyone dealing with translation, and this is a tip that will save you money, and it will improve quality, and it will save you time, is make sure that your translation vendors are using something called translation memory. This is actually a database of past translations. So in the future, as the translators are typing the translations in, it will populate with previous translations in front of them. It speeds up their work, it ensures consistency, and it's extremely, extremely important. It also can reduce your costs tremendously. Usually the typical leverage is about 40%. So you can reduce your costs on future translations if you require that they use this. Another basic one is make sure that you have a style guide and that you share it with your translation providers. They won't necessarily follow the same style because every language has different grammatical rules, different punctuation rules, different capitalization rules, but at least they will have a better sense of the tone that you're trying to achieve. And so they can then replicate that and create a style guide for the other languages, the target languages. Also, one tip that we use here at HubSpot that I would recommend for anyone doing translation is to demand transparency with your vendors. You want to know who is working on your translations, not just an agency, but who are the actual translators. We actually recently started a process where we get on the phone with the translators. We talk to them, we show them the software, we make sure they have access to all the information. And if they have questions, they have direct access to our marketers. The benefit of doing that is that if you don't, an agency will often keep all that stuff behind the scenes or try to manage it themselves. If you really want the best quality, the best way is to have an open relationship with the translation resources. And then the last one, and this is a really important one that I would ask all of you to really think about and consider, is to find an executive champion within your organization. By that I mean an executive champion for global marketing in general, who can help you push global initiatives forward. How many of you have ever had a challenge with that, making sure that global is on the radar at your companies and that international campaigns get the support that they need? I saw some hands go up. So that's really critical because if you don't have a voice internally at your company, and even if you're an agency and you have clients with whom you're working on global campaigns, if you don't have that top level buy-in, it's very, very hard to make sure that that customer in the local market is fully represented and that they're going to get the experience that they deserve. So that's another important tip that I wanted to share with all of you. So with that in mind, I wanted to open it up for questions. How are we on time? Okay, good. We have 5 minutes left. Okay, so I see a question right there.
We're beginning this process. We're probably not very starting to transition more content. And the question that keeps coming up is how much of the website and its associated content should be translated? And to give you some examples, we have analysis, we have case studies, we have quite different question pieces. Do we have all of it?
Yeah.
And, you know, there's arguments like, well, this case study is really about an American company and probably doesn't apply.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, so the answer to that is most companies do not localize everything. Very, very rare. You know, to give you like a basic rule, the 80-20 rule often applies, that 20% of your content is the most important content, because in general, we're having an explosion of content. A lot of companies have a lot of content that they might not even use and isn't that valuable. So I would say, you know, this is the first step in the process, doing a content audit and figuring out what content is the highest performing. But for your home market. But then on top of that, sometimes you'll have data from your web traffic as to other countries are clicking on your English content. And you can see what content's resonating even in English for English speakers in those countries. That's another important source of information. The most important source of information would be getting input from your local stakeholders and your local marketers. So if you don't have any, you can always ask customers in that market or even partners or consultants in that market to help you identify which things do you think would resonate best with this market. So at HubSpot, we actually do a lot of original content for each market in addition to localizing some of it. And the local marketing teams are the ones who select which content gets localized. And we also develop, you know, case studies, original case studies for the different markets. And sometimes we select some and localize them, and sometimes we develop brand new ones. What's that? So support is a really good question. A lot of people wonder, what should we do with our support? Our support content today isn't localized, but we're in the process of getting it localized. it's often a volume question. So if you have a ton of content, tens of millions of words, sometimes you might want to localize a portion of that. And some companies even use the community to help them localize some of that content. So there are a lot of options there when it comes to support content. And actually, support content is a place where you will get a very high leverage using translation memory, which is the technology I mentioned before. If you localize a portion of that, it can really reduce cost. When you're talking about high volumes and there's a lot of repeated content, you can use that to help.
Thank you.
No problem. Yes?
So I had a question. Say you're a smaller company and you want to launch a European-wide marketing campaign, but you can't afford to do a different marketing campaign for every country, but you know one thing your marketing campaign may not work out well in, say, Sweden. Do you still go forward that marketing campaign then?
I would advise to start with one country at a time. I'm not a big fan of going for Europe, I would look at the data really closely to see, is there a market where we have higher time on site, lower bounce rate, with existing content in English? And see, because chances are some of your previous campaigns have had some international success. It's a repeated theme that I've heard from a lot of people I've been talking to here that they say, yeah, I'm not even trying to attract these leads from other countries, and somehow they're finding us and clicking on things, and suddenly they become a customer, and now I've got 10% of my customers coming from here. And so I often say to them, imagine what would happen if you tried and you targeted them more effectively. So I would generally say, look and try to prioritize the countries, maybe pick just one or the top 3 and go for those and focus energy on those. And that way your resources will yield better for you. And there's a question here?
Translation question. For instance, we're going to push out to Singapore. So then you think that you've translated, but what about all the expats we've got? When there's a high expat?
Yeah. So when there's a high, some markets don't require translation because the level of English proficiency is very high. It also depends whether you're a B2C company or B2B. It depends on the product you're selling. Some companies can get by without translation, and Singapore is one of those markets where you have a lot of people who speak English, so you might not necessarily need to localize. If you're going B2C, I might say it's different, but are you B2B? Yeah, so in some cases, you can have certain elements localized into different languages, and then you have the rest of the content in English. So for some markets that have high proficiency in English, you might have, say, social media channels in one language, but then when they actually get to product-related content, it's going to be in English. Yeah. I have 1 minute left. I'll take one more question, and then if you have other questions, I'll provide my contact information here for anyone who wants to email me or tweet at me, anything, I'll be happy to answer. So, one more question? I thought I saw some hands back there. No more questions? Okay. Well, then thank you very much, everyone. And like I said, if you have any other questions for me, my email address is right here, nkelly@hubspot.com. It was a pleasure talking with you today, and look forward to connecting with you afterward. Thank you.